The scent of old paper and lemon polish hung thick in the air. Alessia Conti kept her head down, her focus absolute on the frayed edge of the 18th century landscape she was supposedly restoring. But the job wasn't the point. The point was the room. The point was the house, Palazzo Rossi, a fortress of history clinging to the cliffs above Naples. And somewhere within its belly was her grandfather's masterpiece, The Lament of Persephone. A painting created 50 years ago, the night her nonno fled Naples with nothing but the clothes on his back and a secret that had haunted their family ever since. Her forged credentials felt like lead in her pocket. Dr. Elena Ricci, an art conservator from Milan. It had gotten her past the gates, past the silent men in dark suits who stood at every doorway like living statues. A commotion at the far end of the grand hall made her flinch. The hall was filling with people, sharp-suited men with cold eyes, elegant women draped in silk. A family gathering, Rossi style. And at the center of it all, holding a crystal tumbler, was Don Niccolo Rossi himself, l'archivista, the archivist. He was younger than she'd expected, late 30s, with severe aristocratic handsomeness that seemed carved from marble. His eyes, a startling cool gray, swept over the gathering, missing nothing. He didn't command the room. He owned it. Alessia shrank back, hoping the large easel would render her invisible. This was her third day inside the palazzo. This was the closest she had been to him, and the proximity was like standing next to a dormant volcano. A man, florid-faced and pompous, was holding forth, clearly trying to impress the Don, a professor from some northern university, gesturing wildly with Prosecco, and of course, the great canto of Ugolino, the professor boomed, a testament to eternal suffering. La bocca sollevò dal fiero pasto. He raised his mouth from the horrid meal. He butchered it. The pronunciation flat, the cadence wrong, stripping the ancient verse of its terrible, mournful music. It was a line about betrayal, about consuming your own in the depths of hell. The irony of it being misquoted in this house was physically painful. The words were out of her mouth before her brain could engage. Quel peccator. Levando a muso, she said, soft but clear, in perfect Neapolitan dialect. That sinner raising his muzzle. The room died, every conversation halted. Every eye turned toward her corner. The professor looked slapped. Her blood turned to ice. Idiot, you've just signed your own death warrant. Then, a new sound. A soft, definitive click. Don Niccolo Rossi had set his crystal tumbler down on marble. The sound was slight, but in the absolute silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. His storm-gray eyes found hers and pinned her to the spot. The world narrowed to that gaze. He took a single, slow step forward. The crowd parted without a sound. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell bergamot and sandalwood. His voice, when he spoke, was low, devoid of anger, but layered with absolute command. Finish the verse. Alessia's throat was dust-dry. She could only stare into those endless gray eyes. He tilted his head, a predator considering strange new prey. Then, he continued, dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. Explain how you know it. 1,000 lies flashed through her mind. But the intensity of his gaze stripped away all pretense. He wasn't asking for an excuse. He was demanding the truth. Her lips parted. She kept her eyes locked with his, a silent act of defiance. E impastò coi denti l'altro cranio, she recited, the Neapolitan dialect giving the horrific image raw, visceral power, and ground with his teeth into the other skull. The silence deepened. She could feel the hostility radiating from the men around him, their hands twitching as if longing for weapons. Don Niccolo Rossi did not move. He studied her, his expression unreadable. The ghost of something, not a smile, but profound intellectual curiosity, passed through his gray eyes. You quote the Inferno in the tongue of my grandmother, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a different timbre now. Clinical assessment, to a man who misused it as a party trick. An interesting choice, Dottoressa Ricci. He knew her alias. Of course he did. The use of her false title felt like deliberate mockery. I apologize for the interruption, Don Rossi, she managed. It was a reflex, he repeated, tasting the word. A scholar's reflex? Or something else? Before she could respond, he turned his head a fraction, addressing the room without raising his voice. The conversation grows stale. See to our other guests. The crowd, remembering to breathe, slowly resumed murmured conversations. The florid professor was swiftly led away, face blotchy with humiliation. In moments, the space around them was cleared. Niccolo Rossi turned his full attention back to her. You will join me for a drink. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. He led her into a library that took her breath away. 2 stories high, with wrought iron galleries and shelves stretching to the ceiling, crammed with leather-bound volumes. A massive ancient globe stood in one corner. This was his true domain. L'Archivista. He poured 2 glasses of deep red wine. Their fingers brushed as he handed one to her. His words were warm. Hers were ice cold. Now, he said, leaning back against his desk, the picture of casual power. We will have the truth. The verse you chose speaks of intimate betrayal, and you speak it not with the accent of Milan, but with the soul of the South, my South. So I will ask you only once. Who are you, really? The wineglass felt precarious in her hand. The forged identity was shattered. To cling to it would be an insult to his intelligence. And in this world, insults were paid for in blood. She had to give him the truth. She took a small sip. It was rich and complex, with a taste of dark cherries and oak. My name is Alessia Conti, she said, abandoning the alias. It felt like stepping off a cliff. I am an art historian. He gave a slow, approving nod. Alessia, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a claim. Continue. My grandfather was from Naples. He loved Dante. He taught me the verses as a child. The dialect, the rhythm, it was his. This at least was true. Niccolo watched her, his gaze missing nothing. And what brings an art historian with a Neapolitan grandfather's tongue to my home, pretending to restore a mediocre landscape? This was the precipice. I needed the work, she said, the lie bitter. The credentials were enhanced to get an interview. I apologize for the deception. He swirled the wine, thoughtful. A desperate woman is a dangerous woman. Desperation makes people predictable. But you are not predictable, Alessia Conti. You are a paradox. A forger with the soul of a scholar. A mouse who quotes Dante to the lion. He pushed off the desk and took a step closer. The space between them crackled with dangerous energy. The deception is a minor offense, he said, his voice dropping. Easily forgiven. But the tongue, the knowledge, that is a currency I value. You have my attention, and now you have a choice. A choice? She whispered. You can walk out of this library and out of my palazzo, and we will forget this ever happened. He paused, letting the impossible offer hang in the air. She knew it was a test. Or, he continued, his gray eyes holding hers, you can stay, and prove that the mind behind that tongue is as valuable as I suspect it is. He was offering her a place at his table, not as a conservator, but as something else entirely. And to find her grandfather's painting, she had to stay. She looked at the terrifying intelligence in his eyes and made her choice. I'll stay, she said. A slow, dark smile touched his lips. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Good, he said. We begin tomorrow. But outside the library door, unseen by either of them, a man in a dark suit pulled out his phone. He typed 3 words. She's the granddaughter. The message was sent to a number with no name attached. The night offered no rest. Alessia lay in the unfamiliar bed of the guest room she'd been assigned, its opulence stark against the cramped pension where she'd been staying. Every creak of the ancient floorboards felt like commentary on her precarious position. She had traded anonymity for the spotlight of the Don's attention. It was catastrophic, and yet it was also her only path forward. The next morning, a severe-looking woman in a dark dress appeared. I am Sophia, she said. Don Rossi has asked that you join him in the library after breakfast. Your things from the pension have been retrieved. Alessia's heart stuttered. Retrieved? For your convenience and security, Sophia said, tone leaving no room for argument. It is no longer safe for you to reside outside the palazzo. The finality sank in. Her escape route was gone. An hour later, she walked back into the vast library. Niccolo Rossi was waiting. standing before a large folio spread open on a reading stand. He wore a simple black sweater today, and without the suit jacket, he looked more like the scholar his nickname implied. "Alessia," he greeted, not looking up. "Come, tell me what you see." She approached cautiously. It was an original hand-illuminated page from a medieval manuscript, depicting St. Francis and the Wolf of Gubbio. "Late 13th century Umbrian school," she said, "professional interest overriding fear. The lapis lazuli is extraordinary. And the subject?" He prompted. "The Wolf of Gubbio. A story about subduing a beast through peace, not force." A faint smile touched his lips. "An interesting choice for my collection. Many would expect me to prefer Judith with the head of Holofernes. Do you?" she asked, emboldened. "I prefer complexity," he said. A story read in more than one way. The wolf was tamed, but also incorporated. He became part of the town, protected by it. A different kind of power. He pulled down a heavy, leather-bound book. Dante again. The Convivio. Your thoughts on his treatment of nobility as a virtue of the soul, not blood. And so it began. For 2 hours, he engaged her in a rapid-fire, intense debate that spanned art, philosophy, and literature. He was testing the limits of her knowledge, probing for weaknesses. It was a verbal duel, and Alessia found herself rising to the challenge. He was brilliant. Ruthlessly so. His interpretations were sharp, unorthodox, grounded in a deep understanding of power and human nature that no university could teach. She argued with him, corrected him on a minor point about Florentine guild symbols, and for a fleeting moment saw genuine respect in his eyes. During a lull, as he poured coffee from a silver service, she saw her opportunity. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the stacks of portfolios, the locked cabinets. "Your collection is immense," she said carefully. "It must be generations of work." "Generations," he confirmed. "The Rossi family has always had an appreciation for beauty. And for history, we understand that who controls the past controls the narrative." The phrase sent a chill down her spine. It was too close to her own quest. "My grandfather spoke of a painting once," she ventured, heart hammering, "from the late Renaissance, the Lament of Persephone. He said the composition was revolutionary. I've always wondered if it survived." She held her breath, watching him. Niccolò Rossi went perfectly still. His affable, scholarly demeanor evaporated, replaced by chilling stillness. He set his coffee cup down with a soft, precise click. "The Lament of Persephone," he repeated, voice dangerously soft. "A curious piece to mention. Most believe it was destroyed 50 years ago. The air grew thin. He knew of it. He knew exactly what she was talking about. I've just always found the myth compelling," she stammered, retreating. "The idea of being trapped between two worlds." His gray eyes bored into her, seeing through the flimsy excuse, seeing the ghost of her grandfather standing behind her. "Two worlds," he murmured, dark understanding dawning. "Yes, a dangerous place to be, Alessia. One must choose eventually which world to belong to." He took a step toward her, and the intellectual camaraderie shattered. "Your grandfather was Lorenzo Conti. He worked for my father. He painted that masterpiece. And then he tried to steal it." The confession hung between them, undeniable now. He had known. He knew everything. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression transformed into something cold and lethal. "We have a problem," he said. Not to her, but to the room. He pressed a button on his desk. "Marco, conference room now!" He turned to Alessia. "You will come with me. What's happened?" "Someone just tried to kill one of my captains at the docks. And I believe they know exactly who you are." The words hit like ice water. She wasn't just caught between her mission and his world anymore. She was caught in a war. He grabbed her arm, not roughly but urgently, and led her from the library. They moved through corridors she hadn't seen before, descending into older parts of the palazzo. Stone walls, narrow passages. The temperature dropped. They entered a room filled with monitors. 3 men stood waiting, all wearing expressions of controlled fury. On the largest screen, security footage showed an explosion at a warehouse, bodies on the ground. 2 dead, one of the men reported. It was the Torino family. They left their signature. Why now? Niccolò's voice was blade sharp. "Word is out you have something they want. The man's eyes flicked to Alessia. Someone they want. Niccolo's jaw tightened. Explain. Lorenzo Conti had connections to both families before he disappeared. The Torinos think the painting is rightfully theirs. They think you're using his granddaughter to unlock something. The room's attention shifted to her like a physical weight. Niccolo turned to her slowly. Is there anything else you haven't told me? Her mouth was dry. I don't know anything about the Torino family. I came here for the painting. That's all, one of the men scoffed. She's a liability. She's mine. Niccolo cut him off, voice dropping to absolute zero. And she stays alive. But she stays here. No one in or out without my knowledge. He turned back to the screen. Double the perimeter. I want eyes on every approach, and find out how they learned about her. His eyes narrowed. We leak. The meeting continued, with tactical discussions about responses and retaliation. Alessia stood against the wall, trying to process that her presence had just triggered a gang war. When they finally left the room, Niccolo didn't take her back to the guest quarters. He led her deeper into the palazzo, to a wing she hadn't accessed before. Where are we going? Somewhere they can't reach you. He stopped before a heavy door, inputted a code, and opened it. The suite beyond was even more luxurious, and more isolated. The balcony overlooked an inner courtyard, its wrought iron bars too close set to squeeze through. The East Wing, he said. My most valued guests stay here. I'm a prisoner. You're protected. He stepped closer, his presence filling the doorway. Do you understand what's happening? The Torinos don't want the painting. They want what's in it. And they think you know what that is. I don't. Your grandfather embedded something in that painting. A code, a map. My father used it to hide assets he kept separate from the family. When he died suddenly, the knowledge died with him. His gray eyes pinned her. Until you walked into my home asking about it. The truth unfolded, staggering. Her grandfather hadn't just painted a masterpiece. He'd been forced to create a treasure map. The painting exists, Niccolo continued. I've had it locked in my vault for 20 years, unable to read what's hidden in plain sight. You are his blood. You have his eye, his mind. You will decipher the code. And if I refuse, he stepped so close she could feel the heat of him. Then the Torinos will take you from me, torture you for information you don't have, and kill you when you can't provide it. At least with me, you have value. You have purpose. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheek. And you have my protection. She should be terrified. She was. But beneath the terror was something else. A dark thrill at the intensity of his focus, the possessiveness in his touch. How do I know you won't kill me when I'm done? You don't, he said. You have to trust that I value rare things. And you, Alessia Conti, are very, very rare. He stepped back, severing the contact. We begin tonight. The painting is in the vault. Decipher the code, and I will consider your family's debt paid. You will have your life. You may even have the painting itself, once its purpose is served. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Do not disappoint me, Alessia. The door closed. The lock engaged. She sank onto the bed, trembling. She had come looking for her grandfather's ghost. Instead, she'd walked into the middle of a power struggle that could get her killed, but the painting was here within reach. And now she had a reason and permission to study it. She thought of Persephone in the myth, trapped between worlds, forced to make a choice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had chosen. She just hoped she'd chosen the right king. The hours until nightfall stretched like tar. Alessia paced the beautiful rooms, her mind racing. The ghost that had defined her life was no longer a myth. It was a key, a weapon, and her mind was the lockpick. When Sophia came for her after dark, the woman's demeanor was focused and intense. She led Alessia not to the library, but down a series of increasingly narrow stone corridors, deep into the palazzo's oldest foundations. The air grew cool and damp, smelling of earth and old stone. They stopped before a massive reinforced steel door, stark and modern against medieval architecture. A keypad glowed beside it. Niccolo was waiting, silhouetted by a single bare bulb overhead. He dismissed Sophia with a nod. The sound of her retreating footsteps was swallowed by silence. The heart of the palazzo, he said, his voice echoing. He input an extended code. Heavy bolts retracted with solid thunks. The door swung open on silent hydraulic hinges. The air that washed out was cold, climate-controlled. The room within was not large, but every inch was utilized to the fullest. Racks held paintings swathed in protective cloth, shelves lined with antique boxes, and a large safe stood against the far wall. But her eyes were drawn immediately to the center of the room, to an easel positioned under focused, diffused light. There it was, the Lament of Persephone. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but its presence filled the vault. The style was a masterful pastiche of late Renaissance art, Caravaggio's rich, dark colors, and Artemisia Gentileschi's emotional drama. It depicted Persephone not in sunny fields, but in the gloom of the underworld. Hades was a shadowy, influential figure in the background, his face half in darkness, with an obsidian crown on his brow. But the focus was entirely on Persephone. She was not a weeping maiden. Her head was bowed, but her spine was straight. In her hand, she clutched pomegranate seeds, their juice like blood on her fingers, and her expression was one of profound, terrifying acceptance. She had eaten the fruit. She had chosen her fate. It was a lament not for lost innocence, but for stolen sovereignty. Alessia approached it as one would a holy relic, breath caught in her throat. This was her grandfather's work. She could feel him in every brushstroke, in the defiant set of Persephone's shoulders, a quality she recognized from old photographs. He had poured his own rebellion into the myth. Well? Niccolò's voice was soft behind her. It's breathtaking, she whispered. He was a genius. He was a tool, Niccolò corrected, though without venom. Now look closer. See what he hid. She leaned in, her art historian's eye taking over. She ignored the central figures and began scanning the background. The underworld was a cavern, its walls etched with faint, almost geological patterns. At first they seemed like mere texture, cracks and fissures in the stone. But as she traced them, her pulse quickened. They were too regular, too deliberate. There, she said, pointing to lines near Persephone's foot. It's not random. It's a pattern, a sequence. Niccolò moved to stand beside her, so close she could feel his warmth. What kind of sequence? It looks topographical. Her mind raced, like contour lines on a map. And these, she moved her finger to tiny star-like flowers in a crack. These are specific, Adonis vernalis, spring pheasant's eye. They don't grow in caves. They're native to a particular region, the Apennine foothills east of here. She straightened, turning to look at him, excitement momentarily overriding fear. He didn't paint a code of numbers or letters. He painted a landscape. The symbols, the flora, the geological formations, they're all clues to a physical location. Niccolò's eyes were alight with fierce, focused fire. He was no longer looking at the painting. He was looking at her, at the mind that had unraveled its first secret in minutes. Where? He demanded, voice low and intent. I don't know yet, she said, shaking her head. It's a puzzle. I need time. I need to study it and cross-reference these symbols with geological surveys and botanical guides. It could take days. He held her gaze for a long moment, the air crackling between them. The dynamic had shifted again. She was no longer just a debtor or a threat. She was the only one who could read the map. You will have everything you need, he said finally. Books, maps, a computer with secure access to any database you require. This vault will be your workshop. No one enters but you and me. He was giving her the keys to his kingdom's greatest secret. He turned to leave, pausing at the vault door. Do not disappoint me, Alessia. Then he was gone, the massive door sealing shut, bolts sliding home with finality. She was locked in, but for the first time it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a sanctuary. The ghost of her grandfather was here, in the brushstrokes, in the coded landscape. He had left a message, and she was finally listening. The world outside the vault ceased to exist. Time was measured not in hours, but in the slow, meticulous unraveling of a 50-year-old secret. Niccolò was true to his word. The next morning, a trolley laden with books was wheeled in. Geological surveys of Campania, botanical encyclopedias, historical maps. A sleek computer terminal was set up in a corner, its fan a soft hum. Alessia worked with single-minded intensity she'd never known. She forgot to eat until a tray appeared. She forgot to sleep until her vision began to blur. The painting was no longer just a masterpiece. It was a complex, layered cipher. She discovered that the cracks in the cavern wall formed a precise, if stylized, map of a specific valley in the Apennine foothills. The Adonis vernalis was one clue of many. A particular species of lichen painted on a rock corresponded to a specific altitude. The flow of a painted subterranean stream mirrored the path of a real seasonal creek. Niccolò visited her each evening. He would stand silently, watching her work, her fingers tracing lines on large survey maps spread across a second table. Her brow furrowed in concentration. He no longer questioned her. He observed, a silent partner in the hunt. His presence, once so terrifying, became part of the vault's atmosphere, a constant, watchful energy. 3 days in, she hit a wall. She had the valley and the ridge, but she couldn't find the final piece. What was she looking for? A cave? A buried strongbox? It's here, she murmured to herself, voice raspy from disuse. I know it is. The triangulation, it has to be this ridge. Alessia! She jumped, her head snapping up. He was standing closer than usual, looking over her shoulder at the maps. He smelled of night air and clean wool. You found it? The location. The valley, the specific ridge. But I'm missing something. The code gets us to the door, but we still need the key. She rubbed her tired eyes. There's another layer. He picked up one of her notebooks, filled with frantic scribbles. You have done in days what my men could not do in decades. It's what I was trained for, she said, weary pride in her voice. To see the patterns everyone else misses. He set the notebook down, gaze lingering on her face, pale and smudged with exhaustion. You are pushing yourself too hard. The concern in his voice, so unexpected, disarmed her completely. I have to finish this. Why? He asked, voice low. Is it only to clear the debt? To save your own life? She looked away toward the painting. The pomegranate seeds in Persephone's hand glowed like rubies. It's for him. For my grandfather. To understand why he did it. Why this was worth risking everything for. He was a proud man who thought himself smarter than his masters, Niccolò said. But the judgment was gone from his tone. Or a man who believed some things shouldn't be owned, she countered softly, meeting his gaze. The air in the vault grew thick, charged with unspoken tension that had been building for days. The intellectual intimacy, the shared focus, the terrifying proximity. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. The gesture was so intimate, so startlingly gentle that she froze. His fingers were warm against her skin. You see the world in shades of morality, Alessia, he murmured. Right and wrong. Theft and ownership. My world is a tapestry of shades, survival and consequence. Your grandfather understood that in the end. He chose survival for his family. He chose to run. And what am I choosing? She whispered, heart hammering. His gray eyes held hers, deep and unreadable. You tell me. Before she could form an answer, a sharp electronic buzz echoed in the vault. The internal comm system. Niccolò's head turned toward it, his expression hardening instantly. The moment of vulnerability shattered. He walked to the wall and pressed a button. Yes. She couldn't hear the reply, but she saw the way his shoulders tightened. I will be there, he said, voice cold and flat. He released the button and turned back to her. Continue your work. Do not leave this room until I return. He left without another word, the vault door sealing behind him. The silence he went was different. Pregnant with danger, an hour passed. Then another. The only thing she consumed was fear, bitter in the back of her throat. When the bolts finally retracted, she jumped. The door swung open. It was Niccolò. He looked the same, impeccably dressed, expression controlled. But she could see the storm in his eyes, barely contained fury. What happened? The question was out before she could stop it. He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the painting and stood before it, back to her, hands clenched into fists at his sides. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The Torinos hit one of our supply routes, he said, voice dangerously calm. 3 dead. They're escalating. The blood drained from her face. He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes was one she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating assessment that made her blood run cold, which means we have no more time for caution. He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides. Finish it. Now. Please give me the final piece. The location. Not the valley, not the ridge. The exact spot. He was using the attack and the deaths as leverage and applying maximum pressure to force a result. And it was working. She stared at him, and a cold, evident fury settled over her. She would not be bullied into mistakes. Get me the regional land registry files from 1955 to 1965, she said, voice suddenly steady, devoid of emotion, and the personal diaries of the head surveyor for that district during that time. If my grandfather hid something, he would have used the landmarks and records he had access to then, not now. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, followed by grim respect. He gave a curt nod. It will be done. The materials appeared within the hour. Heavy ledgers smelling of dust and bureaucracy. Smaller, leather-bound diaries filled with tight, precise script and neat sketches. She worked with frantic energy, the urgency he'd instilled providing fuel. She cross-referenced painted rock formations with the surveyor's sketches, the flow of the subterranean stream with old property lines. Her grandfather hadn't just been an artist. He'd been a meticulous researcher. It was deep into the night when she found it. In the surveyor's diary from 1958, a footnote mentioned a peculiar natural rock formation on the eastern ridge of the Valle dell'Acqua Fredda, the cold water valley. The locals called it La Bocca del Diavolo, the devil's mouth. It was a narrow fissure in the cliff face, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The surveyor had sketched it, a dark vertical slit that resembled a screaming mouth. Her eyes flew back to the painting. There, in the deepest shadows behind Persephone, half obscured by a painted stalactite, was the same formation, the devil's mouth, and pouring from it, almost imperceptibly, was not water, but a trickle of painted gold, the same gold leaf used for highlights on Persephone's crown. Her heart slammed against her ribs. That was it. Not a cave, not a buried box. A fissure. The gold was the key. The treasure wasn't buried. It was hidden within the rock itself. She stood up so fast her chair screeched back. She went to the comms panel and pressed the button. I have it, she said. Within minutes, he was there. She showed him her work, her notes, the surveyor's sketch, and the gold leaf detail in the painting. He studied everything with silent intensity, then looked at her. You're certain? Yes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheek. You are extraordinary, he murmured. Then, more businesslike, we leave at first light. But his touch lingered. His thumb traced her lower lip and she felt her breath catch. Alessia, he said, voice rough. Do you understand what you've done? You've just given me the power to expand my empire beyond anything my father dreamed of. You've made yourself invaluable. Is that what I am? She whispered. Valuable? His other hand came up to frame her face, tilting it up to his. You are dangerous, he said quietly. You see too much. You understand too well. You should terrify me. But I don't? No. His eyes searched hers. You fascinate me. And that is far more dangerous. The air between them was charged with electricity. Every rational thought screamed at her to step back, to maintain distance. But she was tired of fear, tired of hiding. She rose on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, he went perfectly still. Then he was kissing her back with fierce intensity, his hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. It was hunger, claim, and promise all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he said, voice rough. Tomorrow we finish this. And then, she prompted. And then we decide what comes next. For both of us. He pulled back, his thumb tracing her swollen lips one last time. Get some rest, Alessia. You'll need your strength. He left, the vault door closing behind him. But this time she heard the bolt slide and then unlock again. A gesture. A statement. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a partner. She touched her lips, still feeling the heat of his kiss, and turned back to the painting. Persephone stared back at her, those pomegranate seeds clutched in her hand, Choose your kingdom, the painted eyes seemed to say. Choose your power, Alessia was choosing, and tomorrow she would claim it. Dawn was a pale gray smear over the Bay of Naples when the convoy of 3 black SUVs left the palazzo. Alessia sat in the back of the lead vehicle, Niccolò a silent, imposing presence beside her. The folder with her research rested in her lap. They drove in silence, leaving the city behind and climbing into the rugged green folds of the Apennine foothills. After 2 hours, the vehicles turned off onto a dirt track that wound steeply upward, eventually stopping in a small clearing. The Valle dell'Acqua Fredda lay before them, a deep, mist-shrouded cleft between 2 forested ridges. We walk from here, Niccolò said. 4 of his men, including a massive silent guard she'd seen before, fanned out, securing the perimeter with quiet efficiency. Alessia followed him, using the survey maps and her notes to guide them. Her eyes scanned the ridgeline for landmarks she'd memorized: the twisted pine, the outcrop of white rock, the dry creek bed. It was all there, precisely as her grandfather had painted it. There, she said, voice breathless. She pointed to a nearly vertical cliff face covered in ivy and moss. The Devil's Mouth. It was precisely as the surveyor had sketched it. A narrow, dark fissure, like a wound in the rock, almost entirely hidden by vegetation. Niccolò nodded to his men. 2 of them stepped forward, carefully clearing vines from the opening. The fissure was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Niccolò took a powerful flashlight from one of his men and looked at Alessia. After you, Dottoressa. She swallowed, took a deep breath, and ducked into the darkness. The space inside was larger than it appeared, a natural cavern that smelled of cold stone and old, dry air. Niccolò followed, his broad shoulders barely clearing the entrance, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The cavern seemed empty except for rubble and dust. For a heart-stopping moment, Alessia thought she'd been wrong, but then the flashlight beam caught it. Set into a natural alcove in the rock wall, like an altar, was a single heavy lead-lined box, dull and unadorned. Niccolò crossed the space in 3 long strides. He didn't hesitate. He lifted the lid. There were no gleaming coins, no glittering jewels. The box was filled with documents. Bundles of bearer bonds, their values astronomical. Deeds to properties in Zurich, Geneva, and the Cayman Islands. A stack of passports from different countries, all bearing his father's photograph, but different names. It was not a pirate's treasure. It was a ghost's fortune, the ultimate escape fund. Niccolò sifted through it, his expression unreadable in the dancing light. Then he went perfectly still. His fingers closed around a small leather-bound journal tucked at the very bottom. He opened it. The handwriting was his father's. He read for a moment, his face a mask of stone. Then he slowly closed the book and looked at Alessia. My father's contingencies, he said, voice echoing softly in the cavern, against his own family. Against me. He tossed the journal back into the box. You were right. It was never about gold. It was about the power to vanish. He turned to face her fully. You found it. You delivered what he spent his life hiding from me. He took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with something she couldn't name. Triumph, gratitude, possession. Your debt is paid, Alessia Conti. Your grandfather's crime is forgiven. You are free to leave. The words hung in the cold air of the cavern. Free. She could walk away, return to her old life. Forget this place, this man, this dangerous world. But as she looked at Niccolò Rossi, at the king standing in his hidden treasury, she realized something fundamental had changed. She didn't want to leave. What if I don't want to be free? She said quietly. His eyes widened fractionally. What are you saying? She took a step toward him, closing the distance. I'm saying I see you, Niccolò. Not the Don, not the archivist. You, the man who values knowledge over violence, who tests before he strikes, who kissed me last night like I was something precious. You are precious, he said roughly, and dangerous. If I stay, she interrupted. I stay as your equal, not your possession, not your tool, your partner. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. You understand what that means? He asked. The world I live in? The choices you'll have to make? The blood that stains everything I touch? I understand, she said. And I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you. He stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow, dark smile spread across his face. Not the terrifying one from the library, but something warmer, more genuine. Then you're choosing power, he said. Real power. The kind that shapes cities and topples empires. He reached into the box and pulled out a bundle of documents. This is just the beginning, Alessia. With your mind and my resources, we could build something extraordinary. We could, she agreed. He offered her his hand, not to help her but to seal their pact. After a heartbeat, she took it. His grip was firm, possessive, and warm. He pulled her close, his other hand sliding around her waist. No going back, he murmured. No going back, she agreed. He kissed her there in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of his father's secrets and her grandfather's defiance. It was a claiming kiss, deep and consuming, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she felt fundamentally changed. She was no longer Dr. Alessia Conti, art historian. She was Alessia, partner to Don Niccolo Rossi, and as they emerged from the devil's mouth into the pale morning light, his arm around her shoulders, his men watching with new understanding, she knew she had chosen her underworld, and she had no regrets. The return to the palazzo was a silent, seismic shift. Alessia sat beside Niccolo, her hand still humming with the memory of his grip. The yes she had uttered in the cold, dark cavern now seemed to fill the entire vehicle. When they arrived, he did not have her escorted to the East Wing. He led her directly to his office, the nerve center of his empire. He placed the box on his desk. This changes nothing, and it changes everything, he said. The wealth is a tool, the knowledge in that journal is a weapon, but the most significant asset gained today is standing right here. He looked at her. Your first duty. We must identify every name, every holding in this box. We will relocate the assets and secure them under new layers of ownership. Your mind for patterns will be essential. For the next 3 days, they worked side by side in his office, often late into the night. She deciphered cryptic notations in his father's journal and cross-referenced them with modern financial databases. He provided context, as well as knowledge of shadowy networks and the men who controlled them. It was a brutal education in the mechanics of absolute power. He listened to her. He debated her conclusions. He respected her mind in a way no colleague ever had. The initial fear never completely vanished, but it was tempered by a growing sense of her own capability and value. On the third evening, as they reviewed corporate structures, she looked up. The Torinos, she said. What happens now? With this, she gestured to the box. Your position is unassailable. Do you destroy them? He leaned back. Destroying them would create a vacuum. Chaos is bad for business. No, I will absorb them. I will make them an offer they cannot refuse, backed by the power you helped me unlock. Their operations will become mine. It is more elegant. Elegant, she repeated, marveling at the cold precision of his thinking. It is the difference between a butcher and a surgeon, he said. I prefer to be a surgeon. His gaze rested on her. And so do you. It is why you are here. But before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression hardened. What? She asked. The Torinos. They're requesting a meeting. Tomorrow night. Neutral ground. He set the phone down, his eyes calculating. They know they've lost. This is either capitulation or a trap. What will you do? I'll go, but not alone. He looked at her. You'll come with me. Her eyes widened. Why? Because you are the reason this war started. You are the symbol of what I possess and they cannot have. Your presence will be the ultimate demonstration of my power. He stood, coming around the desk. And because I want them to see exactly who stands beside me. It was a risk, a public declaration, but it was also a test of her courage, her commitment, her willingness to step fully into his world. I'll do it, she said. His hand cupped her face. You understand this makes you a target? That from this moment forward you will be seen as mine? As part of this family? I understand. Good. He kissed her, slow and deep. Then tomorrow we show them what it means to challenge us. The next evening, Alessia descended the grand staircase wearing a dress Niccolò had chosen, black silk, severe and elegant, with a neckline that was both modest and devastating. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek knot. At her ears, diamond studs caught the light, the ones with the hidden security features he'd given her that morning. "If anything goes wrong," he'd said as he fastened them, "twist the right one. I'll come for you." Niccolò waited at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a charcoal suit that made him look like what he was, a king. His eyes swept over her, and something heated and possessive flared in their gray depths. "Perfetta," he murmured. "Perfect." The car was waiting. As they drove through Naples, he briefed her on the details. "The meeting is at the Fontana Club. Old money, old rules. Neutral ground means no weapons, no violence within the walls. But that doesn't mean they won't try something before or after. What do you want me to do? Be yourself. The woman who decoded a 50-year-old cipher in less than a week. The scholar who speaks perfect Dante. Let them see the mind I value." He took her hand. "And stay close to me." The Fontana Club was housed in a restored 17th century palazzo, all marble columns and frescoed ceilings. They were escorted to a private room overlooking an interior garden. A long table dominated the space. 4 men were already seated. At the head was an older man, silver-haired and distinguished, with cold, dark eyes. Don Salvatore Torino. Beside him sat 3 others, his sons or captains, all watching with predatory intensity. Niccolò entered first, Alessia at his side, his hand at the small of her back. The Torinos stood, a gesture of grudging respect. "Don Rossi," Salvatore said. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Don Torino." Niccolò's voice was cordial but flat. "You requested this conversation. I am here to listen. And you brought a guest." Salvatore's eyes shifted to Alessia, calculating and cold. "The famous Dr. Conti, Lorenzo's granddaughter. The woman who found what we could not." Alessia felt the weight of their stares but kept her expression calm, neutral. "She is my consigliere," Niccolò said, the title deliberate and shocking. "It was a position of power, of trust. She speaks with my voice. You will address her with respect." A ripple of surprise went through the Torinos. One of the younger men scoffed. "A woman? As consigliere." "A mind," Niccolò corrected, voice dropping to something dangerous. "The best I have encountered. The fact that she is a woman is irrelevant. The fact that she sees what you could not is everything." Salvatore raised a hand, silencing his son. "Clearly, Don Rossi, you value unconventional assets. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting." He leaned forward. "The painting. The Lament of Persephone. It was created for both our families. My father commissioned it along with yours. We have an equal claim. Your father paid for canvas and pigments," Niccolò said coldly. "My father paid for the artist's life. The painting is mine." "And yet it was Lorenzo Conti who created it," Salvatore pressed. "His granddaughter has a claim above us both." All eyes turned to Alessia. She felt Niccolò's hand tighten fractionally on her back. A warning, or a permission. She spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady. "My grandfather created that painting under duress. He was a tool used by powerful men. When he tried to reclaim his own work, he was forced to flee for his life." She met Salvatore's gaze directly. "I did not come to Naples seeking ownership. I came seeking understanding. I found both. The painting remains where it belongs, with the family that valued not just the art, but the mind behind it." It was a declaration of loyalty, a choosing of sides. Salvatore's expression hardened. "So, you stand with him completely." "I stand where I choose to stand," Alessia said. "And yes, that is beside Don Rossi." One of the younger Torinos leaned forward, his voice ugly. "You understand what you're rejecting? Our protection? Our goodwill? We could have offered you—" "Threats concealed as offers," Alessia interrupted smoothly. "I'm a scholar, signore. I recognize subtext. You don't want to protect me. You want to use me. There is a difference." Niccolò's hand slid to her hip, a gesture of both approval and possession. Salvatore studied them for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I see why you value her, Niccolò. She has fire. He sat back. Very well. We acknowledge your claim. The painting is yours. The assets are yours. However, understand that this does not end the competition between our families. It merely clarifies the boundaries. Competition is healthy, Niccolò said. It keeps us all sharp. But know this, Salvatore. She is under my protection. Any move against her is a move against me, and I will respond with overwhelming force. Understood. Salvatore stood, his sons following suit. Then we have an accord. For now, the Torinos filed out, each nodding curtly to Niccolò. The youngest one's eyes lingered on Alessia, with a mix of resentment and grudging respect. When they were alone, Niccolò turned to her, his eyes blazing with pride and heat. You were magnificent, he said roughly. You faced them down without fear. You claimed your place. I claimed us, she corrected. He pulled her hard against him and kissed her with fierce intensity. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. You understand what you've done? You've just become a public figure in this world, the woman beside the Don. There's no anonymity now. No safety in shadows. I don't want shadows, she said. Not anymore. His smile was dark and satisfied. Good, because I have plans for you, Alessia Conti, and they require the light. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. Alicia's presence in Niccolò's world became not just accepted, but expected. She sat in on meetings with his captains, her insights into human behavior and patterns proving invaluable. She helped restructure their operations, suggesting legitimate business fronts that would lend respectability to their enterprises. She was good at this. Terrifyingly good. And Niccolò watched her bloom into power with something that looked dangerously like love. One evening, they walked together in the palazzo's walled garden under stars. The air was sweet with jasmine and possibility. My father would have had you killed the moment he learned who you were, Niccolò said. He saw threats. I see potential. And what do you see now? She asked. I see my equal, he said, stopping to face her. I see the future. Our future, he took her hands in his. There was no kneeling, that wasn't his way. But the intensity in his eyes was more powerful than any traditional gesture. Marry me, Alessia. Rule with me, not just as my consigliere, but as my wife, as the Donna of this family. Let us build a dynasty. Her heart stopped, then raced. She looked at their joined hands, then back into his eyes, seeing her future reflected in his gaze. Every rational part of her screamed this was madness. She'd known him for weeks. He was a criminal. She was stepping into a world of violence and moral ambiguity, but she'd also never felt more alive, more valued, more herself. Yes, she said. It was the most straightforward answer she'd ever given. He kissed her with a ferocity that stole her breath, his hands sliding into her hair, his body pressing her back against the garden wall. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, he was smiling, genuinely smiling, and it transformed his face into something younger, lighter. We'll marry quickly, he said. Within the month. I want the city to know. I want everyone to know. A spectacle? She asked, amused. A statement, he corrected. You are mine and I am yours. Let them all bear witness. That night, he carried her to his bed, the main suite she'd never entered before. The room was dark wood and silk, dominated by a massive four-poster bed. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands worshipping every inch of skin he revealed. You are the most extraordinary thing that has ever walked into my life, he murmured against her throat. The mind, the courage, the fire, all of it, mine. Ours, she corrected breathlessly as his mouth found hers again. Their lovemaking was fierce and consuming, a claiming and a surrender both. When she finally fell asleep in his arms, exhausted and sated, she felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had found her home in the heart of the beast. The wedding was held 3 weeks later in the great hall of the palazzo, under the cold gaze of ancestral portraits. It was a spectacle of controlled power. The guests were a map of Niccolò's influence. Sharp-eyed men from Sicily, sleek politicians from Rome, terrified-looking business associates. Even the Torinos attended, a gesture of the uneasy peace. Alessia wore ivory silk, a severe and elegant choice, with a crown of obsidian and diamonds in her dark hair. The painting, The Lament of Persephone, had been moved to the hall for the occasion, hanging behind the altar like a benediction. She walked down the aisle alone. She had no one to give her away. She was giving herself. Niccolo waited, his expression not soft, but fierce, triumphant. As she reached him, he took her hand, his grip firm and sure. The vows they exchanged were not about love and honor, but about loyalty and strength. "I pledge my mind, my will and my loyalty to you," she vowed, her voice carrying through the silent hall, "to protect what is ours, to see the threats in the shadows, to stand beside you in all things. I pledge my power, my protection, and my life to you," Niccolo responded. "To value your counsel above all others, to defend you against any threat, to build with you a legacy that will endure." It was a merger. A coronation. A pact sealed in front of witnesses who understood precisely what it meant. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Niccolo kissed her with possessive intensity. The hall erupted in applause, some genuine, some fearful, all respectful. Late in the evening, as an orchestra played, Niccolo pulled her into a dance. His arm was steel around her waist. "Are you happy, Mia Regina?" he murmured. "My queen." She looked up at her husband, her partner, the king of their shared kingdom. "I am where I am meant to be." They slipped away before midnight, ascending to the main suite. As the door closed, the public masks fell away. He framed her face with his hands. "Alessia," he said, her name a prayer. "My wife, my queen, my everything." Their wedding night was a fierce and joyous consummation. It was claiming and giving, a fusion of minds and bodies. Afterwards, tangled in silk sheets, she felt tears slide down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from overwhelming rightness. "What is it?" he asked, concerned, wiping them away with his thumbs. "I'm happy," she said, laughing through the tears. "Truly completely happy. I didn't think that was possible." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Anything is possible now. We are building something new, something better than what came before." "A dynasty," she whispered. "A dynasty," he agreed. "Built on intelligence instead of fear, on partnership instead of domination. You've already changed everything, Alessia, and this is just the beginning." She curled into his side, his arm a protective weight across her, and listened to the steady beat of his heart. She thought of the desperate woman she'd been, driven by ghosts and need. That woman was gone. In her place was a queen who had chosen her throne, a partner who had transformed a criminal empire, a wife who had found love in the most unexpected place. She had quoted Dante in perfect Italian, and the Mafia boss had set down his drink and demanded she finish the verse. She had finished it. And in doing so, she had finished him, not destroyed him but completed him, made him whole, just as he had done for her. 5 years later, the library was filled with warm afternoon sun and the sound of a child's laughter. Lorenzo Rossi, now 4 years old, sat on his father's lap, his small fingers tracing the illuminated letters in an ancient manuscript. At the same time, Niccolo explained the text's history in a patient and measured tone. Alessia stood in the doorway, watching them, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. Their second child was expected to arrive in the spring. The painting, The Lament of Persephone, now hung in the grand hall, no longer hidden. Simply art. Simply her grandfather's genius, finally given its due. The empire they had built together was different from the one Niccolo had inherited. Still powerful, still formidable, but more sophisticated. They had absorbed their rivals bloodlessly, expanded into legitimate businesses that would provide for their children and grandchildren. Violence was now a last resort, not a first response. Lorenzo looked up and saw her. His face lit up. "Mama!" He scrambled down and ran to her, throwing his arms around her legs. She bent down, running her fingers through his dark hair, Niccolo's hair, and kissed the top of his head. Niccolo rose and came to them, wrapping his arms around both. His hand settled over hers on her belly, their unborn child a promise between them. "Our kingdom," he murmured, looking from his son to his wife, his eyes soft with a love that would have been unimaginable to the man he'd been before she walked into his hall, and quoted Dante. Alessia looked at the family she had built in the heart of darkness, at the dynasty rising from the ashes of old sins and older secrets. That desperate woman driven by ghosts was gone. In her place stood a queen who had chosen her throne, a mother raising princes, a partner who had transformed a criminal empire into a legacy. She had quoted Dante in perfect Italian, and the Mafia boss had set down his drink and demanded she finish the verse. She had finished it. She had finished him. And together, they had written an ending neither could have imagined. One of love, of power tempered by wisdom, of a family forged in fire and sealed in devotion.